So what I would say is tools like Dynatrace definitely, and even you don't necessarily need a commercial tool. I mean, you've got tools like Nagios that you can use to look at your JMX feeds, monitor that, and send alerts and all kinds of things. So there are ways of doing that, but again, it comes down to automation, to making sure that you've got all these metrics that you know about, that you should be monitoring, and that you actually put measures in place to measure that. I think that it comes down to that. So it definitely helps to be proactive, but in some cases, with some of these cases, a lot of other cases that I've seen, there's just no ways that you'll be able to predict that something's going to go wrong. I think you'll catch the vast majority of them by proactively monitoring, but you'll still find these needle in a haystack type of problems that takes a couple of days to find out. And for me, I actually enjoy doing it. For me, it's part of sort of the thrill of the hunt, and it's a bit of a Sherlock Holmes murder mystery exercise. So it depends on your sensibilities and obviously what priorities you have. I mean, if your main priorities are getting development done, then this is going to be a big stumbling block for you. But if things have been arranged that you're focused on doing this, and that takes precedence over anything else, then it becomes a lot less painful to do. I don't know if you want to add
something. So basically, the only thing that I want to add is you've seen a lot of use cases today and metrics, but you will find your own, and unfortunately, you find it too late. And then just make sure that if you find something new, how did you find it, and how can you automate finding it in the future? And that's really what it is. I guess just what you said, but finding your own stuff, and then making sure to automate it and educate people too. I think what I see a lot, and I think I mentioned that, like the company Target and others, they have internal DevOps days or like internal mentoring sessions where you actually do things like this internally on a constant basis.
We can take it out.
Thank you, Rudolf. Very compliant. I'd like to add, I think that people don't plan for measurement and monitoring the way they should, and the payoff is enormous. The time you spend configuring the measurement and monitoring and automating that, you get back that money so quickly, and most organizations don't realize that. They just want to move on to the next thing, and but all of us have to push back against that. So ask, how are we going to measure this thing in production, even though your responsibility might just be development? Ask the question, point them in the right direction, because frankly, it is going to save you from spending a horrible weekend drinking bad coffee in the middle of the night in some strange place while you're trying to figure out why this thing is not doing what it should.
I don't know, I just say use them.
Just expand on one of the around the stage of the development lifecycle which you pick up bugs. I think the same goes for performance. There are only so many things you can cater for up front, but thinking about performance from the very beginning when you start developing or architecting the application is imperative. You don't want to optimize too early, but just give thought to where you're going, and it'll reduce the cost of the issues that may arise.
Right, Andres, I wanted to ask about, you never talked about what methods there are for storing these metrics, so what is there available?
You talk about how Dynatrace stores the data?
Yeah.
So I think what I showed are two types of data sets. We store the pure paths down to the method level, in a file system, in our own format, but you can use a REST interface to also pull it out or look at it in the client. The long-term trending metrics, the response times, the number of database calls, that ends up in a SQL database. But also either look at it in the client, use a REST interface, we have an alerting mechanism as well. But we store a ton of data, obviously, we have a lot of data. And the deep down to the method every pure path, we have it in a rolling window, store it to disk. The long-term trending time series data that ends up in the database, and we have a data aging mechanism. If you want to have some details, we have documentation, deployment guides where you can say, this is how many transactions we expect, how much data storage do we need.
Is there something which we can use like to interpret the start, like over a long period? Is there something, or would I have to implement like something like Storm on top of it to interpret that transfer?
No, we have automatic baselining built in, we have automatic alerting, you have comparisons in there, so you can, for instance, compare two time frames with each other, and we tell you what's the difference. Different access patterns in the database, different memory allocations, that's all in there. Of course, you can also, we have a feature where we can actually stream our data out to things like Splunk, or whatever tool you have, and then you can run your analysis on top of the Dynatrace data, and maybe combine it with other log information that you pull into Splunk. That's also possible.
The last question will be about performance. So, how does it actually affect the performance of application, and like how much can I actually pull from an application before I notice that it's actually these tracing applications which is actually causing it to slow down?
So all of these tools that were mentioned, us, New Relic, AppDynamics, Riverbed, we all have basically protection mechanisms in there to not impact performance too much. What we actually do, and I think in the discussion during lunch, we do two things, and so do the other tools. We do on the one side instrumentation and tracing, and we also do sampling. And we combine these two approaches so that we only get those methods that we think we really need. And for the rest, we basically use a sample approach and sample these threads. Sampling is much more efficient than tracing every single method. That's why combining these two technologies makes a lot of sense. The average customer that we have running the stuff in production, I think we have some here, they say between 2 and 3% of overhead that we have. But it also, again, depends, because you can turn on a lot of stuff and then you have more overhead. But by default, this is the thing will be automatically calibrated, just like lowering a little bit of the details that we capture.
I'm assuming you're directing that at me. Well, I think the approach should be, first of all, you want to keep things as simple as possible initially, so you start with this technology that can suit. And over time you find we have a problem here. So either your VBAs come running. I had a case where we were doing testing of a messaging application. The VBA was telling me, no, we cannot store this much data on the mainframe. And I said, how is this possible? Because I was running this on my desktop. And so you may probably, when you run into some technical constraint, is obviously it's a serious case. But that's a point where you typically also find that, well, this thing is now a beast on its own, and it's a target for some architecture change to move that out. And then hopefully you have a design that has some interface or service behind which all of this is happening, which means that the impact of making this change is lower. But I would say in general, like with most of these things, you need to understand what your application normally looks like, and over time you see a trend that's changing or a quick change, and you start investigating, and then you identify the way we're dealing with this data is inefficient. And now you find that, oh, it's because the indexes are too big, or the queries are too complex, or the access path is too complex, and then you go searching for a solution. And that might not be a different technology. It may just be that, hey, there's an index missing, or if we do this slightly differently, we're in a good place. So you don't change for the sake of change. I mean, if I'm stuck in traffic and I look at, I pull over and I say, no, how do I get to work faster? Google faster car, go and buy a Ferrari because now I'm going to get to work.
Yeah.
No, we all know that's not going to work because the traffic is still there. So the solutions aren't always what you think they are. But usually, if you go and find out why was that thing initially developed, so you have an idea for maybe we should be using this technology. But then you come across those use cases, and if you don't have a match there, don't try and force it.
Yeah.
Because that's just going to hurt as bad as what you're hurting now.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Just want to add to that. In two of the clients that I've worked at, I've seen that they both have fairly big legacy databases. One being this Informix database, and the other one a Smalltalk database, a Gemstone database, and in both those cases, it is extremely difficult to get off those environments because you've got business rules, or you've got business data there in that format. I mean, for example, the Gemstone one is an object database, so that's completely alien to normal RDBMSs. So in that case, to convert is almost a company-wide effort that leads to a lot of disruption. So what I've seen with those is the best way of trying to accomplish that is to do it bit by bit. Don't go full hard, because it's either it's very ambitious and it might just work, or the CTO might just get fired. So just watch out for that.
Thanks.
I think the only thing that I wanted to add, I think the initial question that you had, do I need to move to a different database because I go microservices? And just to what you said, this is not the right approach. What do I need to do, and what tool or system does the best job for fulfilling my requirement? Just because you move into a new, cool, sexy technology on the one side doesn't mean the other stuff that you have in place right now doesn't work for you.
This is a question not for the speakers, it's actually for Theo. I'm counting 5 speakers up here. I think one is from Cape Town. Are you from Cape Town?
Yes.
So
There's another one that was
Herman had to leave.
Oh, Herman had to leave. Okay. And obviously you're struggling to getting the Java community going in Cape Town. Can you explain what are you trying? Obviously this is the first conference. How can people help you?
I think
Typical question.
No, it's straight. Another level of weird. Kind of. Anyway, we can all leave now. Cheers, guys. Look, so I think Vincent is somewhere around here. There he is. Okay, so Vincent is he's going to be speaking tomorrow, and he started the Java community down here in Cape Town. So look, the conference is really just to generate the fact that there is other Java developers besides you and your desk and your computer. And sometimes you get caught in that bubble and you're like, what do I do? Who do I speak to? Who do I go to? And it's so easy just to sort of go to work every day and go into that shell. So something like this really sort of draws out people out of the woodwork to speak to each other. And then also, speak to the sound. I think the plan going forward is really that there should be monthly meetups within Cape Town like there is in Johannesburg. But the end game for me is really that we have more South African speakers on the international circuit, personally. And the only way we can develop that is, and one of the other community members say, pitch your company. If you're going to present something, speak to your team, present to your team, present it at the meetup, and then present it at the conference level. And that's really the 3 steps that you want to be doing. And I'm sure someone up here saying, or sitting in the crowd saying, well, I can present, and there's a couple of things that I found that I can bring up exactly, that's what we're looking for. So when we have our next call for papers, please submit. Submit as much as possible. I mean, there's no such thing as right or wrong. You can either go for 45 minutes or you can go for 25 minutes, at least you take that plunge. So that is the answer, no? Yes?
What can people here do?
Join the community. That's it. First step, join the community. Just go to the monthly meetups. I know that Sound plans coffee, where guys are just sitting and having an informal chat. I think that's a start. But guys, yeah, that's, let's get the community started. Let's get some buzz around the fact that We don't have to look at Europe and the West and whatever else is happening. Africa is as large, and we have just as good a developers down here in the southernmost tip of Africa. That's my opinion. I might be wrong. Please edit that part out. But that's what I think, and the only way we can do that is by getting the guys together. Join your community, speak to the guys. You know, I know Nitsan and I know Andy as well went up to Johannesburg. They presented in Johannesburg. There's nothing wrong with that. Why are we not doing that sort of intercity where guys come down here and speak and vice versa? That's how we get a strong community, and then the students will come and they will get strength from the senior developers. And that's how it grows. I mean, the students are thinking there, well, if they're not doing it, why should I? So, oh, that's the answer. Yes, thanks.
We do something up in Joburg where every now and then we'll have a meetup where there's not just one 45-minute talk. We'll do 3 15-minute talks.
Lightning talks, yeah.
And that lightning talk is very interesting because you are constrained as the speaker. You really have to think about what is that thing you want to say, and you find at the end that you've imparted just as much information, and people take away just as much information. But now they had 3 talks, and that's a lot easier to do than one big talk. You're likely to attract a bigger audience, 3 varied talks, and I think they work very well.
We saw a lot of third-party and open source projects today. What kind of techniques do you guys use to evaluate a project, not only on a technical level, but on a commercial level, so that you can be certain that that library will still be viable in, say, 5 years' time, and not just disappear off the face of the earth?
Just to give context, who in this room is using Java 6? Right. How many people are using Java 6? Right? Who once supported technology again? The supported thing you talked about. What is that?
I mean, I'm working on a project where we've got code that started in 2001. A large chunk of the code is still Corba servers. Well, Corba 2.x. I did a big project to at least get it to be compatible with, I think it was Corba 3, so that it doesn't break everywhere. And there was, I mean, I wasn't going to get any help from anybody. In doing that kind of thing. So, but I mean, when you have to choose something new, what happens? You hear about this library, and you go and track it down, and you see, there's this community on GitHub, and it's very active, and it looks like a good thing, and that's wonderful, and you get to use it, you ask questions, and people help you, and you move on. The flip side is, you get on a project, and you get sent a stack trace, and you Google that, and you find one entry, and the other one is that funny comment that says hit this and it will get it, and you see that's a similar entry on a different forum, but it's the same guy. And there's no responses, but months later there's another one. Anybody? No, if you go and Google the obituaries, you'll find this guy somewhere. Took the short way out. So that happens. And then you go look at the project and you see there was no commits on that project for 2 years. If it was open source, nothing prevents you from going in, finding the problem, trying to fix it. But now you can't release this thing. So that's, if there's one reason, just to have your own organizational binary repo where stuff is cached and where it's now easy to take your patch, if you want to call it, of some library, create your own release so that at least it will fit in with your normal cycle of how do I retrieve my dependencies and things. Because look, you don't want a project where everything comes from my repository except this jar that's in a
lip folder over here. So there are ways you can protect yourself against the legacy, and I'll find out what people have done to do that.
I got one short thing to add. So first of all, there's no guarantee for commercial software either with whoever, right? Companies get bought and then projects get trashed. Additionally to you said, looking at the community, how active is the community, I always go on Google Trends, trend.google.com, and then enter your libraries, and then you see how they're trending. Are they on a downward spiral or are they going upwards? That's also a good indicator.
Make your company become the steward of that open source project. If there's an active community, support it, it'll grow. And that just means more people will use it. And yeah, that's how a lot of these libraries are actually still alive. And it's good to give back.
One of the key reasons why we've started to favor open source projects is the availability of support from some of the vendors. It's particularly being here in South Africa, you're so far removed from the developer who actually wrote the code that when you log a support case, you get first level support that tries to assist you, and often they have little or no idea of the problem that you're facing. And you just don't get access to the developer. Whereas with open source projects, even if they aren't very active, there still are people out there that are able to provide you with guidance. And short of that, as you said, you can go in there and make the change yourself if you absolutely have to.
Thank you very much.
So just to add to the last point, sorry, I just want to mention the mic now. So before the end of the month, we actually need a topic or two presenters. 15 minutes, 10 minutes at a time. Shall we nominate someone? So if you'd like to talk, I'm sure Ross has got a place where we can have a meetup. Yeah, we love Ross. Yeah, so Standard Bank's going to offer their place for a meetup, and I know Richard actually went over. He's got a friend at Alan Gray, and Alan Gray's offered their auditorium as well. So we've actually got enough vendors. We're actually just going to have 2 speakers before the end of tomorrow to actually do 2 topics. Cool.
And sorry. What I've seen is with the jugs, it helps if you serve sushi to get the numbers in.
Just tell me how catering's the best. So just off the stack one, back to the open source question. I would say, might sound obvious, but have a look at the license. It's not open source, not all open source licenses are equal. Secondly, do a code review. If again, it might be stated obvious, but if the quality of the code in the source repo doesn't actually pass your own quality bar, you probably shouldn't be using it. And thirdly, just to echo what I think a couple of other guys said, the level of support from the open source communities, where a healthy community exists, in my experience has far surpassed that of commercial vendors. And I have many, many examples of what name names where there was support contracts in place, and the open source community beats that every time.
And I also just want to mention that we've had occurrences of where we found problems in some of the big vendors' code, and then when we do let them know about what actually the problem is, we get into trouble for decompiling the code because it's a violation of the license agreement. So I'm not telling you what to do, I'm just saying what it is.
It's actually illegal, yeah.
I had a question for the guy with the DB question earlier. He asked if there was any standard way to determine when you should switch to another database. If you're using IBM DB2, you should. I'm just kidding, I hate on IBM a lot. But we're friends.
Sorry, I'm just going to go back to the open source question, just because I have an open source library that I write and I contribute to a few open source projects. First off, the code review. If you actually decompile some of the commercial tools you use and code review that, you're going to be so sad because generally, it's closed source doesn't get the benefit of another set of eyes. It's just you're not allowed to look in there, right? It's like there's an American expression about once you've looked in the sausage factory, you'll never eat the sausage again. So it's quite similar. You won't trust anything if you read the code closely enough. The other thing is, if you want to keep an open source project going, if it looks like it might be useful to you, if it's small enough, it's probably not a worry. Just take in the code and pretend that someone in your company wrote it and left, which is happens often enough anyway, right? Give back, like the guy said, and just be kind to the open source guys. I say that from experience, but also you see it all over GitHub. People come in with demands. They're very sort of, hey, why is your code so? People write it in their free time. They're putting themselves out there, and by coming in and criticizing their work, it's be gentle, because people need to get out there. On the one hand, on the other hand, I would so recommend everybody has a go. Just get in there. If you see a problem, don't just point it out. Try and fix it. It's often easy enough to do, and you are keeping the project alive, and you are making something that is obviously useful to you. You're making it that much better by participating. And once you've done it once or twice, you'll find that it's the barrier is quite low in a sense. People are very happy to take on the help.
This one is probably more for Standard Bank, since it's a big question, or your big company. You said that you use open source software, but when it comes to assessments from companies like PricewaterhouseCoopers, Deloitte, KPMG, they kind of frown upon other companies. When they assess you, they frown upon people using, or companies using open source. So how does your company is still able to use open source and keep its star rating?
Personally, I think we've moved or come a long way since those sorts of views. All that achieves is security through obscurity. You just because you don't have access to just because you have access to the code, it actually ends up making many of the solutions more secure. We personally haven't had any issues or any audit findings against our systems that we've produced, and it gets audited every single year. So as long as you're maintaining the standards in terms of security, there's no issues there.
There's a project, I think it's called Dependency Check, which basically allows you to run a check against all the libraries and dependencies that you use against this global database of known vulnerabilities. And you can add it to your build. I think there's even a Jenkins plugin for it. And it allows you to know whether you are using vulnerable code and to fix it. And if you then give that to whomever from whatever audit company, they will probably just go away and read the list, because they realize that you've done your homework. So, but then communicate this effort to the rest of the people in your organization, because it's a cheap thing to do, and it's worth a lot.
It's not for you. I'll actually speak about it tomorrow. Exactly that.
Oh, okay.
That's cool. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you very much to the speakers. Round of applause to them. I think it says a lot that about the speakers, for them to not only fly but also share a lot of their information with random people they've never met before, and to offer their time. They have full-time jobs, and to be able to take time off their full-time jobs to be able to share information, that says a lot about the speakers. And also thank you guys for attending today. I hope you guys learned a lot. Tomorrow morning our first session starts at 9 o'clock. Coffee is at 8:30. We're going to head down to Q4 just to have one beverage, just to let the traffic die down. So it's an opportunity for people just to get to know each other a little bit more. But I'll see everybody tomorrow morning at 8:30, and thank you very much again. Cheers.